I see people who emulate him, but in my mind, nobody did it better than Tommy.
The Dynamite Kid, baby!
He was the beginning of the modern style of pro wrestling.
My mom told me all the time, your dad was the best.
What I was most impressed with was how explosive he was.
With extraordinary agility and technical mastery, the Dynamite Kid took the wrestling world by storm. His need to be the best was fueled by an intense desire to overcome his small stature by pushing his body to dangerous extremes.
When Tommy found himself in the land of giants, the way to stand out was to make his style more realistic, harder hitting than anybody else's.
You really got banged up, Dynamite.
What goes around comes around, it's a dog-eat-dog world.
There's things that you can do that are going to destroy your body. And he did. He destroyed his body young.
And that's the willingness to sacrifice for the sake of your art, which Tommy took to an extreme.
Debilitating injuries, steroid abuse, and a dependency on painkillers made Dynamite an increasing threat to himself and those around him.
I'm telling you, he had a complete personality change.
Outside the ring, there's a lot of questions about his character.
I think he probably had the worst case of little man syndrome in the history of the world.
Everybody knew not to push his buttons because you would feel his wrath.
We'll out-wrestle you, we'll embarrass you, we'll humiliate you.
He really punched me, and then he ended up kicking me in the face, and he was like a monster.
There was terrible things that he did to me, but that was like a small chunk of it.
And I can't imagine what it would have been like for her having a gun at your head.
Everybody else who did way worse, they get their accolades, and Tom doesn't.
I still have the ability to watch his matches and enjoy them, but people still praise him publicly, and it's like, I can't do it.
He has sacrificed his body, his family, everything for wrestling.
The Dynamite Kid's impact, gigantic. I think he left an unbelievable permanent mark on the business, and for the most part, a positive one on the business. I'm Lance Storm, a professional wrestler for 30 years.
28-year-old Lance Storm.
I think if you're a fan of wrestling today with the faster pace, higher impact, I think that's attributed to Dynamite.
The Dynamite Kid!
And all of those guys in Stampede, you know, Bret Hart.
Bret Hart, there's your opponent for next week. Oh, they're both over the top.
Stampede Wrestling and the Calgary Stampede, those are the two things that Calgary's famous for. My name's Michelle Billington. I used to be married to the Dynamite Kid. One day when my sister Julie and I first came to Calgary, Julie saw Bret and she was like, who's that guy? Oh my God. And it was love at first sight for both of them.
I'm Julie Hart. I'm the former wife of Bret the Hitman Hart and the sister of Michelle Billington. I kind of took Michelle under my wing. I've always been very protective of her whole life.
Julie was more like a mother to me than my mother. She was like my hero. And I started living with them, and when I first saw Tom in the ring, it was with Bret. They were incredible matches, and Tom was like a ping pong ball just flying around the ring.
Well, it's over!
So then when Tom wasn't wrestling, he would stand behind me and talk to me, and I would just like surreptitiously, like, hey, how's it going? Good match. And he's like, yeah, thank you, thank you. So we went for a walk, and it was so romantic. Like it was that big fluffy snow that was coming down, and it was like a blanket of diamonds, and I just thought he was so exotic because he had that English accent. So I had this big romantic idea of that suave, debonair Englishman. I was 18 when he married me. So let's read this one. Michelle, I can tell you this little secret now because we're married. I think that you will believe me. And the next thing on my mind is that we will have some babies. But only when you are ready. I wish that is soon, because when I'm on the road, the babies can look after you. All for now. I love you more than ever. Your ever-loving yard dog, Tom. And he didn't hold Bronwyn until she could walk. Like, he didn't actually pick her up because he was so scared to drop her or hurt her.
My name is Bronwyn Billington. I'm the eldest daughter of Tom Billington, the Dynamite Kid. We had a wrestling ring in our backyard, so he'd always be training his friends or just wrestling around with his buddies, and we used to play in there as kids. I remember being backstage at the wrestling shows. Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, they loved me for some reason. I think I just wanted to hang out with them, really. My dad was a really funny, goofy guy.
I'd just like to tell you about this woman. She's mean, she's lean. She's 205 pounds of fighting fury. She's got 17-inch bicep, 95-inch legs, and she's muscle, steel, and sex appeal.
He had no teeth at one point. He had like the retainer teeth, and he'd pull them out and like do tricks on me, so I thought he was magic. If you look at any of the pictures of my father and I growing up, he was always holding my hand really tight as a little girl. I think that's a sign of like how much he loved his daughter.
When I was younger, my mom would tell me, oh my God, you're so much like your dad, because I learned how to do flips all by myself. I thought he could fly. Like, I've never really seen a wrestler that could do all that. My name's Amaris Billington, and I am the Dynamite Kid's youngest daughter. And I'm just so proud of him for who he was in his career, and he didn't care if someone said you're too small. He's like, watch me.
By the 1980s, the Dynamite Kid is not only one of Stampede Wrestling's top performers, he's also catapulted himself to superstardom on the other side of the globe.
And some of the greatest matches took place in front of small crowds in Japan. My name is Mick Foley. I wrestled from 1985 through 2000 and made several comebacks. There was a series of moves that he did with Satoru Sayama, the original Tiger Mask. And it looked like magic. It wasn't what they did. It was the speed with which they did it and the excellence of execution that was amazing. I perused that on VHS tape the way that most young men of my generation perused the Phoebe Cates topless scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I rewound it and slow motioned it so often that it broke.
The in-ring product that we see today starts with him in Tiger Mask. My name is Dave Meltzer. I'm the editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. I do podcasts at WrestlingObserver.com. There is no Jushin Liger without Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid. You know, that opens the door for Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and Owen Hart and all of these different guys who came after and patterned themselves after him. I think he always had a chip on his shoulder as far as size, and you know, he wanted to be the best, and at his size you had to overperform because it was not what wrestling turned into years later, where a guy his size was acceptable.
If you were looking for illusions, Tommy was a bunch of things, but a magician was not one of them. If it looked good and it looked like it hurt, it's probably because it did.
It was amazing to see. In hindsight, when you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, he just had no regard for his body.
In 1984, the Dynamite Kid's fearlessness in the ring pays off as he signs with the WWF, joining cousin Davey Boy Smith, brother-in-law Bret Hart, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. In order to compete at the top, Tom continues to push the limits of his body.
Tom's physical changes came once he went to WWE. You know, he'd been doing a lot of steroids at the time.
The Dynamite Kid!
Physically, this guy Tommy had one big muscle. He's like Mighty Mouse. This guy had striations in his butt. Muscles just ripping out of his ass. I mean, the guy was just nothing but a pure muscle. My name is Dan Spivey. I'm a friend of Dynamite Kids.
Danny Spivey, of course.
People paid money to come see a bunch of muscular guys beat on each other. Oh yeah, we talked about steroids and did steroids, you know.
Everybody was taken. My name's Gary Ports. I came over to America and started wrestling in 1978, and I met Dynamite Kid.
Scott McGee! Here he comes. Oh.
We got along, Danny, myself, and Dynamite. Every day was Christmas. Every day was like a party.
People would come to one room and give each other shots and stuff and throw the needles into the wall like a dartboard and leave them there.
Me and Danny, one time we woke up, I looked at a wall, and there must be 10 needles stuck in the wall.
I mean, who does that? Dumbass wrestlers, you know.
With his new muscular physique, Dynamite's explosiveness in the ring makes him a breakout star in the WWF. By 1985, he and his tag team partner Davey Boy Smith are packing arenas around the country.
Here are the British Bulldogs.
Davey Boy Smith was his cousin, you know, in many ways emulated him. Kind of same look. People went crazy because they were great.
Davey Boy and Dynamite, and they...
A much harder, faster style than almost everybody else there.
We all wanted to be the Bulldogs. They were gods of wrestling. I remember Dynamite doing that fast suplex.
Snap suplex!
Boom, you were gone, boy, before you knew it. My name is Jacques Rougeau. For 41 years, I was a professional wrestler. I was the fabulous Rougeau brothers with my brother Raymond.
The Rougeau brothers.
Fabulous Rougeau brothers.
The fabulous Rougeau brothers.
I remember Dynamite Kid one night just walking in the dressing room with a needle in his butt. Needle sticky going like this, and he'd go, "I will have a good match tonight!" And you know, he's like a beast. And so I was afraid of him. I was afraid of those kind of guys.
After years of self-sacrifice and physical strain, Tom finally earns a championship victory with Davey Boy at WrestleMania 2.
Two tag team champions, the British Bulldogs.
Now at the top of the pecking order, Tom is hell-bent on putting up-and-coming wrestlers through the same hard knocks he was once forced to endure.
He was a product of the Snake Pit in Wigan, guys who really knew how to hurt you in a hurry, and I don't know for a fact, but I'm assuming that Tommy had the crap beat out of him. And I think it created him a resiliency and also maybe a little bit of bitterness to people who hadn't endured what he had to make it through. And I found that out firsthand.
From Bloomington, Indiana.
I showed up in Providence, Rhode Island with all of one match to my credit.
Jack Foley.
It's me and Les Thornton against the British Bulldogs. I was excited. I'm in the ring with, one of my heroes, Tommy.
Tremendous ovation.
I came in, I got a very, very quick education.
Holds him up there for a while.
Dynamite starts shaking the ropes like he couldn't wait to get in. And when he was tagged in, he sent me into the ropes. And he didn't so much clothesline me as he clubbed me with his bicep in the jaw. And that was the last time I ate solid food for 3 weeks. I didn't know it at the time, but he had dislocated my jaw. I almost lost my career because of that. There were no hard feelings. I said it was such an honor to be in there with you guys, shook their hands, went back to my hotel room and threw up in the toilet.
Tom's appetite for violence soon spreads beyond the ring into the locker room and eventually into his home life, setting off a chain of events that shatters his career, his marriage, and ultimately his legacy.
So this is the matching cape and vest my dad wore in WWF in the British Bulldogs tag team. It has his name on the inside, well, it says Kid. And these were the original British Bulldogs from when I was little.
I used to play Barbies with those.
Yeah, this would be our Ken dolls.
From England, the British Bulldogs.
I really loved the Bulldogs, but I saw a few things happen that changed my opinion.
He was a ribber. He loved giving people a hard time, jokingly, which some people wouldn't think was jokingly. Some of the stuff was pretty stiff that he did.
He used to love to halcyon people. One time, he halcyon my mother.
Putting a sleeping drug into their drinks.
There was a guy called Mitch Snow.
It's our first look at Mitch Snow.
And the kid had a big mouth on him. He'd just talk shit. So Tommy gave him the halcyon gimmick.
Dynamite And Davey Boy went on the balcony to get into his room. And he crept in his bag.
Shaved his eyebrows, shaved his head. The kid went back to his home in South Carolina somewhere because he was in fear of his life.
I think he almost had a nervous breakdown or something.
It's supposed to be a joke, and it's supposed to make people laugh.
Okay, it's funny now, but it's not funny when you're 23 days on the road. It's not funny when you lost your bags earlier that week. It's not funny when you haven't seen your kids in 20 days. It's not funny. It's not easy.
Well, he wasn't like that when I first started going out with him or in the first 5 years of our marriage. There was none of that sadistic behavior. It started happening after his back operation.
During a non-televised match in 1986, Dynamite does a seemingly harmless drop-down with his opponent. After years of being pushed past its limit, Dynamite's body finally breaks down. Tom is rushed to the hospital with a severe back injury, requiring immediate emergency surgery.
When they opened him up, his 4th and 5th lumbar was just shredded, and his discs were all tangled in his spinal cord.
So they removed the disc, right?
2 discs.
He wasn't supposed to work anymore, after the surgery. And I think he was back in the ring 2 weeks later.
Vince, needed to take the titles off of him. He could not wrestle. Davey carried him to the ring. This is off camera. The television audience never saw this. I think he gets hit by the megaphone or something, but he got taken out right away.
Jimmy Hart on the other side of the ring, just striking Dynamite Kid from behind.
Davey worked the match, got pinned. They got the belts off of him.
No!
He got carried back to my car. When he got to my house, he went back in a wheelchair and stayed with me for a couple of days. He'd sleep on the floor, not because I didn't have a bed, but because that was the most comfortable place for him. My wife used to hear him crying in the middle of the night. It was like a whimper. I can't imagine how much pain he was in.
Contrary to doctor's orders, Dynamite rushes a return to the ring just months after the surgery. Wrestling in constant agony, his temper begins to spiral out of control, creating chaos at home.
When the times were good with Michelle and Tom, that was good. But did you ever see times when they were bad between them?
Yeah. I've seen it.
There was one night when he was taking me out to show me a nice time. I didn't want to drink alcohol. So instead of saying I'm not drinking, because that would have been like a diss to Tom, I ordered a tonic water and put lemon in it. He'll think it's a vodka tonic. He grabbed my drink and he drank it and he spit it out like as if it was poison. He said, "What the f is this?" And I was like, "It's tonic water." And he's like, "Tonic water? How come you're drinking tonic water?" He just wouldn't let it go. Like he was so mad. And then all the way home, he was playing chicken on the road. A car would be coming and he'd act like he's gonna hit the car. And he's like, "How could you lie to me?" And I was like, "Sorry, I just didn't wanna drink. What's the big deal?" When we got home, I'm just about to go to sleep and he's like, "Get up." And I was like, "What? What?" He's like, "Get up, get up." And he shoved me in a closet. And he goes, "You stay in there, you little yard dog." I slept on the floor in there. And I was glad that he wasn't bugging me. I was like, "I'll sleep in the closet." Anyway, I find out I'm pregnant with our son. So after Merrick was born, he was, going to great lengths to make up for what he did, the closet incident. And Merrick was such a difficult child. He was just really high maintenance. But Tom was so patient with him. So I think he really wanted to make up for that with Merrick. But, that didn't last.
The Dynamite Kid's home and work life have become increasingly volatile. After being forced to surrender the championship, Tom takes out his rage on another rising tag team in the WWF.
Vince called the Bulldogs and the Rougeaus. And he said, guys, I'd like to go ahead and have a great match with you four guys, and I'd like to have a 20-minute Broadway.
The time limit has expired. This contest is ruled a draw.
It was a draw. So for me, that was a victory because, you know, it's like putting us in the same league as them, which we were not.
A draw indeed is a...
And Lord knows, after that match, I was so happy and everything was good. And I never thought I'd encounter problems with the Bulldogs.
You just tell us, since we were talking about this, what your understanding of the incident with the Rougeaus was.
So the Rougeau thing, I'm tired of it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. Like, is that the only thing that ever happened to him? When the Rougeaus came to WWF, they seemed to have this prestige right away. Tom had the old school way. You earn your right to have privilege.
I've always had an arrogance in me that made me succeed in the business. I never was a mean person, but I was a person who talked a lot and joked a lot, and not everybody liked to hear jokes, you know, and that may not have helped my cause either. And I came in, I walked in the dressing room, and Perfect was sitting completely at the other end of the dressing room against the wall. As soon as I walked in, hey, Jacques, let's play cards. And he knew he got me because I'm a card player. The next thing you know, it's like, pow! And I fell down. And then I got back up, and then he really punched me in the face. And then he ended up kicking me in the face. I was swollen up like the Elephant Man.
Made him look bad in front of the guys to the point where he told Mr. McMahon after the fact, like he could no longer shave because he couldn't look himself in the mirror.
I was in bad shape mentally much more than physically. I didn't want to do what was coming. I just knew I had to.
What do you mean?
Get revenge.
In the days following Tom's brutal locker room assault, Jacques Rougeau anxiously plans his retaliation.
I had lost 10 pounds during that week, since Wednesday to Sunday, because I couldn't eat anymore. I was throwing up every time I'd think I had to fight. I wasn't sleeping well. I was afraid of what was coming.
And Jacques was not a tough street fighter or anything. He just felt that he needed to get his respect back.
And you know what my father said? Before going to the building tomorrow, go to the bank and get yourself a roll of quarters.
Just hours before a television taping, Jacques lies in wait for Dynamite's arrival at the arena.
I saw that curtain open. And I know Dynamite's coming. For the first time in a week, I looked at him in the eyes. And I said, hey, how you doing? He had a coffee in his hand and he went. And I went, pow! You know when you're young and you see those monster movies where the blood is flowing out like a river? It's true. 4 teeth came out. And then I remember Dynamite Kid. I'm gonna yeah! And then I said, the next time I'm gonna put you in a wheelchair!
Was it a roll of quarters? I don't think so. I think it was a pair of brass knuckles.
I just didn't think what Tom had done deserved getting his teeth knocked out.
Tommy couldn't handle it. It bothered Tommy. His reputation had been damaged. I mean, here you got the guy that's tougher than nails get physically abused like that. You know, he wanted to beat the shit out of him, and then some, probably.
Tom's plan for revenge comes to a halt as Dino Bravo, a wrestler with alleged ties to organized crime, gives him a cautionary warning.
Tom bought a 9mm handgun with a clip for me. I was like, I don't want that gun. Like, I was so scared of it. He goes, look, I don't want to scare you. I talked to Dino Bravo, and he said he saw an envelope with Tom's name, our address, And inside of it had a picture of our house, me and the kids. Like, if there's any retaliation, like anything, your family's gonna be dead. We sold our house because we were worried that the mafia, they knew where we lived and everything.
Jacques got his respect back. Dynamite never was allowed to get his respect back, I suppose you could say.
His life was never the same. He was never the same guy.
Dynamite's ex-wife says that Dynamite didn't get revenge on you because the mob would come after them. Is that true?
That is funny. But there's something I gotta tell you guys. I forgot about that. Now you're bringing it back. I didn't like Dino Bravo, but I knew he was a stooge. I knew he was a stooge for the Bulldogs. That whatever I said to him, he was gonna bring it back to the Bulldogs. I took a piece of paper and I wrote a name down. I wrote a fictive name, an invented name. And I told Dino, I said, so you see this name here? I gotta call him every night. And I said, if I don't call him one night, things will be taken care of. And I'm glad to hear that it worked.
Finding out about the mafia possibly coming to kill his wife, that really made him not want to be a part of that company anymore.
At the 1988 Survivor Series pay-per-view event, Tom decides to end his career in the WWF.
I don't think Dynamite was ever happy in WWF. He liked the respect he had in Japan. So it was like, we can cut a deal in Japan, we can get away from this thing.
Tommy was really hurting on that tour in Japan. But you would not have known it if you were a fan, because he was still giving 100%.
He started to say his arm was bothering him. But later I found out his ligaments weren't even on the bone. He got his shoulder operated on. It was terrible. About a week later, he was upset with me because my girlfriend came over and he was like, you just talking to Sandra, you don't even care about me. And I was like, yes, I do, Tom. And he starts going, he takes his supporting armband thing off. I was like, stop it. And he's like, I was like, stop it. All the shit we've been through. And you're like trying to set us back and wreck your arm? I didn't understand, like, what the hell?
With countless injuries from years of self-inflicted abuse in the ring, Tom's best days are now behind him.
Tom was slipping deeper and deeper, I'd say, into pills and drinking. This one night, he invited me to come watch wrestling. It was hours watching him and Tiger Mask. He said, watch this. Took a F of a bump. Just him and Tiger Mask all night long. That's my last memory of Tom. Being with him and watching the end of greatness.
Do you think after the incident with Jacques that something changed emotionally for Tom?
Well, after that, he hit quite a few people. No, he broke a few jaws.
It was New Year's Eve. It was about 10 o'clock, and Tom came in with his brother and a couple of friends that he went out with. And he had this white sweatshirt on, and it was just full of blood. And his cheek is like cut, and it's just the flap is just open, like you see his cheekbone. And he's got his sunglasses on. Bronwyn's crying, Daddy, Daddy, what happened?
I remember I was scared. I was like, what happened to Daddy?
He's like, I fell down, little girl. Daddy's gonna be okay. Bronwyn never saw this stuff, but she was seeing it. And I was like, oh my God, I was feeling like such a failure, like as a mother. And now I'm pregnant and I'm gonna bring another child into this horrible life. I just couldn't take it anymore. And that's when I got like suicidal, and I'm walking around going like, I just can't live another freaking minute like this. And I finally decided that was it. And I gave Tom a one-way ticket to England. And I said, Tom, I would like you to leave now. Take whatever you need and just go. And then that's when the shit went down.
And my dad dragged my mom by the hair across the floor.
He lost his mind. He was like, he had me in some kind of hold and my jaw went out. He let me go and I was like, I put my jaw back. The kids were there. They had never seen anything like this and they were crying. I'm trying to act like, you know, Daddy's having a moment. It's gonna be fine, he's gonna leave. He goes, no, I think you should go. And I was like, I'm the one pregnant. I'm the one with a toddler. Merrick was still in diapers. You know, all my stuff is here, all their clothes are here. And he went downstairs and he got a gun. And he said, if you're not out in 15 minutes, I'm gonna blow your head off. And I was like, no, you're not. He's like, oh, hell.
And my dad then put a shotgun up to my mom's head. And I was holding my little brother screaming, Daddy, no, Daddy, no.
They're hysterical. I'm not though, because I'm like calling his bluff. And I'm like, no, you're not blowing my head off. If you're not gonna leave, I'm calling the police. So I called the police and I said, my husband's threatening to blow my head off and I'm pregnant and I have children. And she goes, well, honey, if he said you could leave, just leave. Oh God, I was like, not again. Like I didn't want to go to Brett and Julie's because like, I just didn't want to bring our bullshit over there again. But I did. I packed up my little bags and I left.
She was terrified that he was gonna come and who knows do what to her or any of us, you know. His headspace was not good at that time.
Michelle's harrowing experiences would stay a family secret for years until they were eventually exposed to the world, forever altering the legacy of the Dynamite Kid. In a final act of violence after holding his wife at gunpoint, Tom leaves his family behind in Calgary and returns to England.
He moved back to England in 1991. My mom was about 7 months pregnant with me.
I wanted a girl because I had the perfect name. I had the name Amaris, and it means gift from God. And I believe Amaris saved my life. I believe she saved all our lives. That kid has been a blessing since the day she was born.
He just had his retirement match in Japan. Now he'd wrote a letter to Michelle saying that he was going to come to Calgary.
I really believed that Tom would come and see his baby. And thank God he didn't, because in the end, I think he did like he manned up and let us be. I think he knew there was something wrong with him. Like, he wasn't the same person. Like, this violence was out of control. I don't think he had control of it anymore.
After he finished wrestling, he was fighting in garages, just like a dog, like a pit bull.
It was just cars parked in a circle with lights on, and it was just bare nut fights. And he was doing those to survive.
Did he talk much about his family?
No, I knew you were going to ask me that. No, he didn't. because that was just Tommy. You know, his personal stuff was wouldn't let people in. No, he didn't let me in because he didn't want to show me any sign of weakness. It's a macho thing, I know, but you know, I had to keep that reputation. You know, of not being a wimp.
5 years after his retirement, Tom returns to Japan for a comeback match.
The comeback match was real sad. He looked like a shell of the Dynamite Kid.
I think all of us like kind of willingly suspend that state of belief in order to believe in a different reality, that we are who we're portrayed as being, and that we are that tough, and that we are immortal in some way.
One time he went to ambulate and he just hit the deck. Went to hospital and he said, what about my legs? And they told him he had too much scar tissue. Too much scar tissue to operate. So,
you know, guys came to see him, and for the most part, he didn't want anyone to see him. The greatest wrestler who changed the business and everything like that, and this guy who at times could be an absolute monster, and then the absolute tragic ending. Way too young, you know, when your 40s in a wheelchair. It's just a sad thing from being this incredible athlete.
I felt so sad for him. Of course, I still loved him. I mean, God, like you don't get married and have children and not still love him. Just didn't love what was going on.
She always talked about him like he was like a Prince Charming. She never said anything negative about him. It was always positive. And then the Chris Benoit documentary came out. I think I was about 16 years old. And that was the first time my mom talked about any kind of abuse in the relationship.
As part of a media frenzy sparked by the 2007 Chris Benoit tragedies, a CNN expose airs with focus on domestic violence perpetrated by wrestlers. Michelle is interviewed and for the first time ever details her stories of abuse at the hands of Tom Billington.
Michelle says at home the kid was out of control, at one time dragging her by the hair, holding a gun to her face.
He certainly wasn't the guy you fell in love with.
No.
The night before her interview, Michelle reveals to her children the complicated truths about their father.
I was just so mad. I was mad at my dad for hurting my mom because she's like the best woman ever. And I was mad at my mom because I felt like she lied to me about who my dad was. So when I found that there was actually abuse and a gun, she was pregnant with me at that time. That was the beginning of a very dark time in my life.
Despite promising Michelle he would visit his family, Tom would never return to Canada.
When I had my first child, I finally felt whole. I thought that she was everything that I was looking for. And eventually, that started to change again, and I didn't feel whole again. And I knew that it was my dad that I was missing.
She was like, flight's booked, I'm going, are you coming with me? And I said no.
I decided I was just gonna go see my dad without him knowing.
"15 years after Tom last saw his eldest daughter, Bronwyn travels to England to pay him a surprise visit.
Walked into the living room, and that's where my dad was sitting in his wheelchair, and that was the first time I'd ever seen him in a wheelchair. And I immediately just broke down crying. He acted like no time had passed, and he said, "Why are you crying?" I said, "Because I haven't seen you in 15 years. By the third day, it was just my dad and I. And I'm sitting on the couch, and my dad's in his wheelchair, and I was just looking at him like I want to be close to him. So I took a chair and moved it and just sat right next to him. We held hands and we started crying, and he said, "I'm sorry." And that was the only time he'd ever apologized for anything. I knew in that moment what it meant. He didn't have to say anything else, and I just felt it. And it was a really beautiful moment that we shared, and I'm so happy that I went.
At the end there, I understand that, he's very sick.
He had a stroke too, right?
Yeah, I just know it was bad.
Do you remember when you heard the news that he had passed?
Yeah.
Tell me that story.
I can't. What do you want me? When you sit here and cry?
He was a great friend and somebody I cared about a lot. And I miss him. He loved his friends and he loved his kids. And I love the Dynamite Kid.
I knew it was coming, but I didn't cry for like a week. I was in shock.
I got a call from my mom. I think I was consoling her more. And then right before we hung up, she said to me, "Well, now you know that he's right beside you." And I hung up the phone and I just started, because that's all I ever wanted, was for him to be beside me.
The week before, Danny had tried to talk with him. And Danny said, "I love you." And Dynamite said, "Why?"
It brought home a lot of memories when he died of what an integral figure he was in the history of wrestling that probably he'll never get the full credit for, because telling that story is a sad story, not a happy story. You don't have that happy ending story.
Let it go. Let my kids heal. My kids can't heal with this kind of stuff. And if you do talk about the violence, talk about CTE. Talk about the signs of depression. Don't knock him. Like, he could have came back. We could have perpetuated it, but we ended it. We did the right thing. And my kids did better without, him around. Even though it pissed me off that he said, "I hope my children are so proud of my body of work," and I said in my head, why don't you be a father? They don't need a wrestler. But now that I'm older, I understand that that's what he wanted to give the kids.
He's largely been forgotten by the hands of time, but those who witnessed him in his prime, they'll never forget it.
Never seen this, both men on the top rope.
I remember Bruce Springsteen saying, "Trust the art, not the artist." And Tommy had a canvas, and he was brilliant.
The Dynamite Kid.
He's not the first, nor will he be the last to suffer for the sake of his art. And there's a sense that a lot of people who are great at something are not necessarily great at all aspects of their life, and they find solace in doing what they do, but they pay for that brief time. You become a bigger star than you ever imagined, and then you pay for it every day for the rest of your life.
Unfolded on June 28th, 1998. This is not just a story about a wrestling match. This is a forensic examination of a cultural phenomenon, a cautionary tale of human endurance, and a deep dive into the psychology of a man who pushed himself past the point of no return. We are looking at the King of the Ring pay-per-view. We are looking at The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. To understand the collateral damage of this infamous night, we must first look into the mind of the man behind the leather mask. Mick Foley is known globally as the hardcore legend. But everyone who steps through the curtain into this business is searching for something missing in their own lives. According to Foley himself, his upbringing involved being teased, which cultivated an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be liked. He recounts a story from his sophomore year in college that serves as the perfect psychological blueprint for his entire career. He took a swig of red food coloring and threw himself off a bed onto a concrete floor. When he spat the blood-red concoction out, the dorm room watched in absolute horror. One girl screamed that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment of revulsion, Foley found power. If he could not make people love him through conventional means, he realized he could captivate them by surviving the grotesque. He simply needed a reaction. That fundamental drive formed the foundation of his career. Foley did not offer the audience technical masterpieces. He offered them brutal realism. His normal matches involved thumbtacks, barbed wire, and concrete floors. During his tours in Japan, he was blown up by explosives and thrown through flaming tables. As observed by those closest to him, including his daughter Noelle, Foley loved eliciting a visceral response of shock from the audience. He did not enjoy the physical agony, but he became a master at taking unimaginable pain and presenting it as art. His wife, Colette, met him long before the international fame. She saw a gentle, kind man with terrible humor and a warm heart. Their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast, a fitting metaphor for the duality of Foley's life. But Colette also understood his terrifying commitment. When the adrenaline pumped, Foley was driven by a singular goal: to ensure the audience left talking about the show, even at his own grave peril. In the early days, Foley crafted the persona of Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable brawler who seemed legitimately unhinged. Legendary manager and producer Jim Cornette noted that Foley possessed an uncanny grasp of ring psychology. He understood that fans were magnetically drawn to chaos. By acting completely out of control, Foley forced the audience to focus entirely on him. Back in a small apartment with a mattress on the floor and a broken television, Foley would study 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes a day, marveling at the storytelling of man against his brutal environment. He eventually traveled to Japan, stepping into explosive death matches under the mentorship of the legendary Terry Funk, a man universally revered for his ability to make fans suspend their disbelief. Despite making a name for himself as a hardcore icon, the road to the top of the American wrestling mountain was blocked. The World Wrestling Federation during this era was searching for marketable, polished stars. According to Jim Ross, who served as Vice President of Talent Relations, Chairman Vince McMahon flatly refused to hire Foley, deeming him unattractive and unmarketable. Ross had to plead with McMahon to take a chance on his scouting instincts. McMahon finally agreed, but with a severe caveat. He insisted on covering Foley's face. Thus, the character of Mankind was born. It was a bizarre, tortured persona that would have failed spectacularly in the hands of any other performer. But Foley breathed life into the madness. The company needed a formidable opponent to feud with their premier attraction, The Undertaker. McMahon had spent years putting The Undertaker against slow, plodding giants, which often resulted in uninspiring television. Jim Ross knew they needed a lunatic, a wild card who could take the punishment and keep coming forward. Foley was willing to try anything to make the character work. However, the immense challenge for the agents and producers backstage was figuring out how to stop this man from literally killing himself in the process. By 1998, The Undertaker and Mankind had wrestled across the globe, laying a massive foundation through television and pay-per-view events. But Foley felt his character had plateaued. He needed to do something drastic to cement their legacy. The producers decided to place them inside the company's newest, most dangerous structure: Hell in a Cell. Unlike traditional steel cages where competitors could escape over the top, this was a massive, roofed enclosure designed to keep the combatants trapped inside. The first ever Hell in a Cell match had taken place months prior between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. setting an almost impossibly high standard. Foley openly admitted he could not replicate the incredible athletic feats of Shawn Michaels. Seeking advice, he turned to Terry Funk. In a casual conversation, Funk jokingly suggested that Foley should start the match on top of the cage and get thrown off. What started as a dark joke lodged itself into Foley's mind. He pitched the idea to Vince McMahon and The Undertaker. According to those involved, The Undertaker was highly reluctant to throw a man off a steel structure. But Foley was completely dead set on the stunt. Foley viewed this match not as a career renaissance, but as a desperate measure to keep his head above water before an inevitable retirement. When June 28th arrived, the atmosphere inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena was thick with tension. As a broadcaster, I remember the genuine confusion when Mankind made his entrance and immediately began scaling the massive steel mesh to the roof. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were calling the action, completely unaware of the horrifying script Foley had written in his mind. The Undertaker followed him up. Almost immediately, the structural integrity of the cell became a horrifying issue. The roof was held together by plastic zip ties, and beneath the combined weight of nearly 600 pounds, the mesh began to sag dangerously. The zip ties started snapping like gunfire. Then came the moment that froze the wrestling world. As they fought near the edge of the cage, The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and hurled him into the abyss. A 300-pound man fell nearly 20 feet, plummeting toward the concrete floor and crashing violently through the Spanish broadcast table. Time seemed to slow down. The sound of the impact was sickening. Backstage, producers, referees, and fellow wrestlers exploded in absolute panic. Jimmy Corderas, a referee watching the monitors, recalled the collective gasp. It looked like a fatal car crash. Broadcaster Hugo Savanovic had to literally dive out of his chair to avoid being crushed. Ringside doctors, including Dr. Francois Petit, rushed to the wreckage. Emergency medical technicians brought out a gurney. Vince McMahon himself broke character and came to the ringside area. Everyone in the arena and watching around the world believed they had just witnessed the end of Mick Foley's life. But as they secured his broken body to the gurney and began wheeling him down the aisle, the impossible happened. Foley realized that the longer he stayed in the public eye, the more invested the audience became. Driven by adrenaline and a terrifying sense of duty to the performance, he rolled off the gurney. He fought through the officials. With a dislocated shoulder, he began to climb the cell for a second time. Backstage, his colleagues watched in disbelief, screaming at the monitors for him to stop. What happened next was not planned. It was a terrifying accident that nearly cost Foley his life. Back on top of the sagging roof, The Undertaker prepared to execute a chokeslam. The plan was for the mesh to safely give way slightly, allowing them to climb down. Instead, the entire panel gave way completely. Foley plummeted through the roof, falling another 15 feet and crashing violently against the unyielding wooden boards of the wrestling ring. To make matters infinitely worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the opening directly behind him, smashing into his face upon impact. This was not a stunt. This was legitimate devastation. For 42 agonizing seconds, Mick Foley was completely unconscious. The Undertaker looked down from the roof, breaking character to urgently ask Terry Funk to check if Foley was even breathing. Dr. Petit scrambled into the ring. Back in the locker room, panic reached a fever pitch. In any other sport, under any other circumstances, the match would have been immediately stopped. But this was the World Wrestling Federation in the late 90s. Terry Funk, relying on pure veteran instinct, initiated a physical altercation with The Undertaker to buy the medical staff crucial seconds to revive Foley. When Foley finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw were Terry Funk's shoes. Despite suffering a major concussion, a dislocated jaw, a bruised kidney, and massive blood loss, his instinct was to find the cameras. He had a massive wound below his lip. In a grotesque display of showmanship, Foley pushed his tongue through the open wound in his face and smiled at the camera. A tooth, violently dislodged by the falling steel chair, was literally visibly lodged inside his nostril. Incredibly, the match continued. Foley, running purely on instinct and shock, instructed the referee to retrieve a bag of steel thumbtacks. He was choke-slammed directly into the piercing metal, ensuring every inch of his flesh paid the toll. After 17 minutes of pure, unadulterated carnage, The Undertaker mercifully secured the victory. The aftermath behind the curtain was grim. Vince McMahon approached Foley, thanking him for everything he had done for the company, but strictly demanding that he never ever do something like that again. Foley was so disoriented that he had to ask if they had remembered to use the thumbtacks, entirely unaware that the medical team was actively pulling dozens of them out of his back at that exact moment. At home, his wife Colette had endured hours of agonizing silence. Her children believed their father had died on live television. When Foley finally called her, the relief was immediately overshadowed by profound anger and terror regarding his reckless disregard for his own life. While the Hell in a Cell match solidified his legacy and directly led to him winning the World Championship just 6 months later, the physical debts continued to pile up. A mere 7 months after the Cell, Foley engaged in an I Quit match against The Rock. The brutality escalated yet again. Foley had instructed The Rock not to hold back. A spot that called for a few steel chair shots to the head devolved into Foley taking 11 unprotected, horrifying strikes to his skull while his young children sat, crying in the front row. According to medical experts and observers, he sustained legitimate brain damage for a television storyline. The long-term consequences of these decisions are a dark shadow hanging over the industry. Following these events, Foley visited a neurologist who bluntly informed him that he should never wrestle again. The reality of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, an insidious brain disease caused by repeated concussions, became a terrifying specter for his family. His daughter Noelle openly admits that she lives in constant fear of what her father's cognitive state will be 10 or 20 years down the line. Foley himself experienced periods where he would drive through his neighborhood and completely forget where he lived. Today, Mick Foley combats the mental decline by engaging in spoken word tours, performing mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. For years, he harbored a deep resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match, feeling that it completely eclipsed the rest of his career. But a conversation with The Undertaker helped him find peace. The Undertaker told him that what they created that night would outlive them both. When Foley recently visited the company archives and saw the original rusted steel cell, he wept. It was a profound realization of the danger he had survived. Looking back as an analyst of this great sport, we must ask the difficult question, was the adulation worth the destruction? The performers in this industry dress in wild costumes and engage in a fantasy form of combat to earn the acceptance of total strangers. Foley achieved the ultimate love of the audience, but he paid for it with pieces of his body and mind. It is a cautionary tale of the highest order, a dangerously crazy masterpiece that forever altered the landscape of professional wrestling. There may be no reward big enough to cover the risk he took, but as Foley himself notes, it was a truly magical way to make a living. Step into the shadows of professional wrestling history. I have sat ringside for decades, calling the action for the World Wrestling Federation, World Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling, Total Nonstop Action, and all Elite Wrestling. I have seen triumphs, tragedies, and everything in between. But today, we dive deep into a profound and harrowing chapter. A night that forever altered the landscape of sports entertainment. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view event, one match would earn its permanent place as perhaps the most shocking spectacle in wrestling history. It was The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. The concept of Hell in a Cell hits the consciousness like a mallet. According to the accounts of those who were there, Industry veterans knew it was going to be intense, but nobody could have predicted the sheer madness that would unfold. You had two talents out there who liked to push the envelope until it tumbled over the precipice. We often hear the refrain that professional wrestling is a scripted performance, but you simply cannot fake gravity. Many things in this industry have frightened even the most seasoned analysts, but nothing elicited as much sheer terror as this match did. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting punishment that Mick Foley, performing as Mankind, endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically sustain such trauma and survive. The match was real. The pain was undeniably real. The drama unfolding in the arena was real. Colleagues backstage were cursing, screaming, and questioning why he was doing this, calling him an absolute idiot out of sheer panic. Why undergo such torment? One of the industry's most infamous matches. The legacy of Hell in a Cell persists today as both an epic television success and a grim cautionary tale. According to multiple backstage officials, the company dodged several bullets that night. The collateral damage that ensued from this single performance is an entirely separate tragedy. It forces us to ask the hard questions. When does it stop? When is it finally enough? Performers pay all day long for the decisions they make during their 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but everyone who witnessed it must ask themselves, was it truly worth it? To understand the match, we must analyze the psychology of the man behind the mask. Everyone who enters the wrestling business is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, he was teased heavily in his youth, which fostered an overwhelming need to be liked and accepted. He desperately wanted to hold that World Wrestling Federation Championship belt. According to his own recollections, during his sophomore year in college, Foley took a swig of red food coloring and performed a high-flying leap off a bed onto a stuffed item resting on a concrete floor. When he hit the floor, he spat the red concoction out. The entire dormitory was watching. When one girl yelled that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt a rush of power. He reasoned that if he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He simply needed to get reactions. He needed to be noticed. He survived Hell in a Cell, and he became known to the world as the hardcore legend. Today, many fans view Hell in a Cell as the perfect gateway into wrestling. Countless viewers cite it as the first match they were ever shown. Yet, as Foley himself often points out, new fans immediately expect all matches to be that visceral, which is simply not the reality. A normal Mick Foley match was already inherently brutal, often involving blood, thumbtacks, and fire. He subjected his body to barbed wire, endured explosions from Composition 4 explosives in Japan, took spears through flaming tables, and absorbed sickening falls directly onto raw concrete. His daughter, Noelle Foley, reflects on her father's career with a heavy heart. She notes that her father thrived on eliciting shock from the audience. Realism was his primary tool. Foley truly believed he was not having a successful match unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room afterward. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself. Rather, he enjoyed the fact that he could absorb it and portray it in a way that captivated the audience. Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, often found herself questioning if she wanted to be mixed up in such a perilous lifestyle. But underneath the violence, she saw a gentle, kind person with a penchant for corny jokes and terrible humor. Their wedding song was, fittingly, Beauty and the Beast. They were a solid team, and she understood his deep commitment to his craft. When the adrenaline was pumping, Foley wanted nothing more than for the audience to leave talking about how incredible the show was, completely disregarding his own physical risk. This internal drive pushed him to escalate the danger continuously. Early in his career, he developed an unpredictable persona called Cactus Jack. This character was wild, dangerous, and possessed a chaotic charisma that made it impossible to look away. According to legendary manager and producer Jim Cornette, Foley was a master of ring psychology. He understood that audiences gravitated toward performers who appeared completely out of control and off-script. He knew exactly how to take the fans on a psychological ride to elicit the exact response he desired. As his reputation for wild behavior grew, so did the spotlight. Foley's early career was defined by immense sacrifice. He and his wife lived with a mattress on the floor and a black and white television connected to a struggling videocassette recorder. On that machine, Foley would watch up to 12 hours of Japanese professional wrestling a day. He was captivated by the realism and the intense storytelling. To him, it was not merely man versus man. It was a struggle to defeat the very environment. He fully expected Japan to be his permanent career home. Japanese promoters were looking for a foreign talent to feud with the legendary Terry Funk, a man celebrated for his unparalleled ability to make an audience suspend their disbelief. Funk became a mentor to Foley, and together they orchestrated explosive, bloody, and fiery death matches across Japan. Foley was always drawn to this wild style, literally crawling on his hands and knees to prove he had created something special. He viewed this extreme violence as his unique way to stand out in a crowded industry, never envisioning himself as a fit for the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the World Wrestling Federation was operating under a strict family-friendly, general-rated era. It was a very clean, structured environment, and Foley's raw, violent style did not mesh with what the company was selling. According to Al Snow, a former superstar and Foley's closest traveling partner, Vince McMahon initially had zero interest in hiring Mick Foley. McMahon did not find him marketable or visually appealing. It took the keen eye of Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince McMahon to take a chance. The company desperately needed compelling dancing partners for top-tier stars like The Undertaker. McMahon had continually tried pairing The Undertaker with giant, lumbering opponents, which resulted in dull and uninspired television. What the narrative truly required was a lunatic. Documents and backstage accounts suggest McMahon finally agreed to hire Foley under one strict condition. They had to cover his face. McMahon's perception was that Foley was a nobody. From this corporate mandate, the character of Mankind was born. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer, recalled the immense challenge of building a character out of thin air. Yet, this bizarre, deranged persona would not have worked with anyone other than Mick Foley. Without his profound ability to connect with the audience, the mask and the character would have been meaningless. The fans could sense his absolute commitment. Foley was willing to try anything to ensure he was a worthy opponent for The Undertaker. The challenge from management suddenly shifted from getting him over with the crowd to preventing him from accidentally killing himself in the ring. Mankind and The Undertaker built a legendary foundation, wrestling in 7 pay-per-view main events and 10 television matches all over the globe. However, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He knew he needed to do something monumental to add to their legacy rather than detract from it. Approaching the 1998 King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite this legendary feud using a recently developed match concept: Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, steel cage matches in the company required a competitor to escape by climbing over the top or walking through the door. The innovation of Hell in a Cell was adding a roof. 2 men go in, and only one comes out. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match featured Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, serving as a historic mile marker for the industry. Foley watched that first match in awe, fully aware that he could not replicate the athletic feats those 2 men accomplished. 9 months later, the sequel was booked. Foley sought advice from his mentor, Terry Funk. During a brainstorming session, Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the cell structure, and then Foley could be thrown off. What started as a dark joke took root in Foley's mind. He looked at Funk and stated that he believed he could actually do it. Foley could not get the idea out of his head. He casually pitched the concept of being thrown off the roof to The Undertaker and Vince McMahon. Initially, The Undertaker was extremely reluctant to throw his colleague off a massive steel structure. But Foley was dead set on the idea, eventually getting everyone on board. Foley did not view this match as the second act of his career. He viewed it as a desperate measure to keep his head above water, fully believing that after this run, his career would be over. The Undertaker trusted Foley's judgment. If Foley could visualize it, he could execute it. On June 28, 1998, inside a packed Pittsburgh Civic Arena, 16,000 fans eagerly awaited the showdown. The pressure on Foley was immense. He had to follow the masterpiece laid down by Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. Despite not being the most nimble athlete, Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, watched the monitors backstage alongside producer Gerald Briscoe. No one in the audience knew what to anticipate, and neither did the commentators. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were kept completely in the dark. Foley wanted to start the match in a completely unprecedented manner. As his music hit, he bypassed the door and immediately began climbing the towering structure. A wave of shock washed over the arena. The commentators questioned his sanity. Foley had assured management that he was comfortable on top of the cell. But the reality was that he was terrified of heights. As The Undertaker made his ominous entrance, Foley stood on the roof, secretly wondering how he could gracefully climb down without ruining his professional reputation. The match officially began 20 feet in the air. The physical reality of the structure quickly became an issue. The top sections of the cage were secured with simple plastic zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight shifting across the mesh, the structure began to give way, bowing down by nearly a foot with every step. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted to execute a suplex on the unstable roof, but The Undertaker wisely cut the maneuver off, recognizing the severe danger of both men plummeting through the fragile mesh. As they exchanged blows and moved toward the edge of the cage, those watching closely began to sense impending disaster. Directly below them sat the small, fragile announcer tables. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Then, in a moment that stopped time, the 300-pound Mankind was hurled from the roof, plummeting 20 feet toward the Spanish announce table. Observers described the fall as happening in terrifying slow motion, yet over in the blink of an eye. The sickening crash resonated through the arena. The backstage area erupted in absolute concern. It was akin to witnessing a horrific automobile accident. Many genuinely believed they had just watched a man die. In a business built on theatrical violence, no one had ever attempted a stunt of this magnitude. Against all logic, Foley had envisioned the fall and managed to rotate his body in midair, landing flat on the table to cushion the impact and save his own life. At ringside, Spanish commentator Hugo Savinovic had to dive out of his chair to avoid being crushed. The trauma of watching a friend fall from the sky paralyzed the ringside staff. Terry Funk was the first to reach Foley's shattered body, desperately asking if he was conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, the company physician, rushed from the medical room in disbelief. Foley had landed violently on his back and on a dislocated shoulder. Emergency medical technicians rushed a gurney to ringside. They loaded the broken performer onto the stretcher, fully believing the match was over. The audience applauded out of deep respect, assuming they had witnessed a tragic end to the broadcast. But as the gurney was being wheeled up the aisle, Foley realized that the longer he remained on camera, the more engaged the audience became. Defying every instinct of self-preservation, Foley rolled off the gurney. Officials, friends, and doctors begged him to stop. They pleaded with him to stay down. But Foley, running purely on adrenaline and a distorted sense of duty, began climbing the cell a second time. The backstage crew was left speechless. Foley was cementing his legacy as the most fearless, perhaps reckless, performer in the history of the business. By returning to the roof, he added a layer of undeniable drama to the storyline. However, the next planned sequence was supposed to be relatively safe. The idea was for The Undertaker to execute a chokeslam on the roof, causing the mesh to sag dramatically, allowing The Undertaker to push Foley down safely. That is not what happened. When The Undertaker delivered the chokeslam, the zip ties completely failed. The mesh panel tore open and Foley plummeted straight through the roof, free-falling to the solid ring mat below. This was not a stunt. This was a catastrophic accident. Those watching screamed in horror. Backstage, panic set in. Foley lay motionless in the center of the ring. The ring mat is constructed over hard wooden boards and steel. It is entirely unforgiving. Adding to the horror, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the opening directly behind Foley, violently striking him in the face upon impact. He was knocked out completely cold. Medical personnel and officials flooded the cage. The Undertaker, looking down from the roof, signaled to Terry Funk to check if Foley was even breathing. For 42 agonizing seconds, Foley was unresponsive. Realizing the broadcast was in jeopardy and his friend was severely injured, Terry Funk improvised. He attacked The Undertaker to buy precious time, allowing the doctors to tend to Foley. Many argue the match should have been stopped right then and there, but in that era of the industry, matches were rarely halted. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw were Terry Funk's shoes. Disoriented and severely concussed, Foley managed to stand. His face was a gruesome mask of trauma. A massive wound had opened beneath his lip. In a deeply unsettling display of commitment to television, Foley pushed his tongue through the open wound in his lip, smiling for the cameras. A tooth, dislodged by the falling chair, had been knocked into his nasal passage. The pain, the drama, and the profound concern on the faces of everyone involved were entirely real. Despite his condition, Foley insisted on finishing the match. He called for a bag of thumbtacks to be scattered across the ring. Ignoring his broken body, he willingly rolled through the tacks, ensuring they pierced his flesh, driving the audience into a frenzy. Finally, after 17 agonizing minutes, The Undertaker secured the victory. The aftermath was sobering. Foley returned through the curtain to a crowd of deeply concerned colleagues. Vince McMahon approached him, expressing gratitude for what Foley had done for the company, but firmly demanded that Foley promise never to do anything like it again. Foley was so disoriented that he had to ask The Undertaker if they had remembered to use the thumbtacks, completely unaware that doctors were currently plucking them from his skin. The physical toll was immense. He required 15 stitches beneath his lip, lost 2 teeth, suffered a bruised kidney that lasted for 6 weeks, and sustained a dislocated jaw and shoulder. Yet, that single match catalyzed a career renaissance. 6 months later, the man management once deemed unmarketable became the World Wrestling Federation champion. However, the bar for violence had been irreparably raised. Foley felt immense pressure to live up to his moniker as the hardcore legend. He was testing the absolute limits of human endurance. Colleagues warned him that this style would inevitably catch up to him. He understood the warnings, but he simply did not agree. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed the boundaries of safety once again in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. Despite warnings about excessive blood loss and trauma, Foley orchestrated a sequence where his hands would be handcuffed behind his back. The plan called for him to take 5 unprotected chair shots to the head. In the heat of the moment, he ended up taking 11 devastating, unprotected blows. His wife and 2 young children were sitting in the front row, forced to watch in absolute horror as their father was beaten into unconsciousness. His family was severely traumatized. Foley later admitted that he sustained legitimate brain damage for the sake of a television. Storyline. The long-term effects of this era are deeply troubling. Today, we understand the severe consequences of chronic traumatic encephalopathy and repetitive brain trauma. In those days, the industry was largely ignorant of the long-term damage caused by concussions. Foley's daughter lives with the daily fear of how her father's neurological health will degrade in 10 or 20 years. Foley eventually sought independent medical advice after a company neurologist warned him to stop wrestling or risk becoming permanently crippled. Foley acknowledges the dark reality of his physical deterioration. He suffers from immense pain and memory issues. To combat the cognitive decline, he now performs spoken word shows, utilizing them as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. He refuses to live in fear of the unknown, choosing instead to appreciate what he accomplished. Professional wrestlers dress in wild costumes and engage in a fantasy form of combat, often leaving the arena in far worse condition than when they arrived, all to earn the acceptance of complete strangers. For Mick Foley, the roar of the crowd was an addiction. He sacrificed his physique and his long-term health for authenticity and the love of the audience. For years, Foley harbored deep resentment toward Hell in a Cell, frustrated that it overshadowed everything else he had achieved in his long career. But during a quiet conversation with The Undertaker, his legendary opponent reminded him of a profound truth. What they accomplished that night in 1998 will outlive them both. That realization allowed Foley to finally embrace his legacy. When Mick and Noelle Foley recently visited the company archives and stumbled upon the original cell structure, the memories flooded back. Touching the cold steel, Foley broke down in tears. It was a stark reminder of his mortality, of how close he came to losing his life, and of the terrifying risks he took to entertain the masses. There is no financial reward large enough to truly justify that level of risk. While the industry lacked the medical knowledge regarding head trauma that it possesses today, it remains a complex and controversial legacy. Mick Foley viewed the wrestling ring as a canvas for a sublime, albeit violent, form of performance art. It was a perilous way to make a living, but on the nights when the magic truly worked, it provided one of the most powerful feelings in the world. As we reflect on this legendary career, we are left to marvel at the sheer will of the human spirit, while forever remaining haunted by the price that was paid. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Step into the archives of sports entertainment. We are looking back at a night that forever altered the landscape of professional wrestling. A night where the line between spectacular athletics and terrifying reality was not just blurred, but shattered entirely. On June 28, 1998, the World Wrestling Federation presented the King of the Ring pay-per-view event. On paper, it was a high-stakes main event. In reality, it would earn its place as one of the most shocking, visceral, and unforgettable exhibitions in the history of the Squared Circle. The match was The Undertaker versus Mankind. The battleground was Hell in a Cell. According to the memories of those who witnessed it, Hell in a Cell hits the consciousness like a mallet. Fans and insiders alike knew it was going to be chaotic, but nobody could have predicted the sheer magnitude of the madness. In that ring stood two generational talents who loved to push the envelope until it tumbled over the absolute edge. We often hear that professional wrestling is predetermined. The stories are crafted. But as the old locker room adage goes, you cannot fake gravity. I have spent a lifetime analyzing the grit and glory of this industry, and I have been frightened by many things in pro wrestling. But nothing frightened me as much as that fateful night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting, agonizing punishment that Mick Foley endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically absorb this level of destruction and live to talk about it. As the footage shows, this match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. Behind the curtain, veterans of the industry were cursing, screaming, and calling Foley an idiot. They were asking the television monitors, "Why are you doing this?" Today, this infamous match persists as both an epic success and a grim cautionary tale. According to industry executives, they dodged several bullets that day. It is truly staggering to consider that officials allowed a competitor to go completely unconscious, only to wake up and continue the match. The collateral damage that ensued in the years to follow is an entirely different story. It forces us to ask the hard questions. When does it stop? When is it finally enough? Because you pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But as we analyze the psychological depths of the men involved, we all need to ask ourselves one profound question. Was it worth it? Chapter 1. The Anatomy of a Hardcore Legend. To understand the carnage of 1998, we have to understand the mind of the man behind the leather mask. Everyone who steps into the brutal world of professional wrestling is looking for something they find missing in their own personal lives. According to Mick Foley himself, his childhood was marred by relentless teasing. That environment fostered an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be liked by the masses. Foley's journey to the World Wrestling Federation Championship was paved with an unorthodox desire to elicit a reaction at any cost. As told by Foley, a defining moment occurred during his sophomore year in college. Seeking attention in a crowded dormitory, he took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. When he hit the ground, he spat the fake blood concoction from his mouth. A female student watching screamed that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment of shock, Foley felt power. He reasoned that if he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He simply needed to get a reaction. This philosophy birthed the hardcore legend. For a new generation of fans, Hell in a Cell serves as the perfect gateway. Countless viewers point to that match as their introduction to the sport. But to assume all wrestling matches are like, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the craft. A normal Mick Foley match was a theater of brutality. According to historical footage, it featured thumbtacks, fire, barbed wire, and concrete. In Japan, he was thrown into explosive charges. He was speared through flaming tables. He subjected his body to unimaginable trauma. His daughter, Noelle Foley, reflects that her father simply loved getting a visceral, shocked reaction from the crowd. Realism was his primary tool. Foley has admitted that he did not believe he had a good match unless he physically struggled to get back to his hotel room. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself, but he deeply enjoyed the fact that he could endure it and present it in a way that entertained the masses. But what about the toll on his family? Colette Foley, his wife of over 35 years, saw a different side of the monster. When she first met Mick, she saw a gentle, kind person with terrible humor and corny jokes. Their wedding song was a romantic ballad. They were a unified team. Colette understood his unyielding commitment to the business. When the adrenaline was pumping, Foley wanted the audience to leave talking about how incredible the show was, even at his own profound risk. That relentless drive pushed him to become increasingly erratic inside the ring. Chapter 2. From Tokyo to Stanford. Before Mankind, there was Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack was a wild, unpredictable entity. Audiences legitimately wondered if the man was clinically insane. Yet, he possessed undeniable charisma. You simply could not take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, a legendary manager and producer for the World Wrestling Federation during the Hell in a Cell era, noted that Foley was a master of psychological manipulation in his matches. Foley understood that fans were captivated by a performer who seemed entirely out of control, someone who actively defied the script. He could take the audience on a chaotic ride and perfectly elicit the exact emotional response he desired. In his early days, Foley's bedroom consisted of a mattress on the floor and a broken black and white television set. On that screen, he would watch up to 12 hours of Japanese professional wrestling a day. He was captivated by the realism and the storytelling. In those death matches, it was not merely man versus man. A competitor had to defeat their very surroundings. Foley believed Japan would be his permanent professional home. Japanese promoters were searching for a foreign competitor to rival the legendary Terry Funk. widely regarded as one of the greatest of all time for his ability to make audiences suspend their disbelief, became a mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in explosive, fiery, blood-soaked battles across Japan. Foley was naturally drawn to the extreme elements of the sport. He believed that crawling on his hands and knees through broken glass and wire was proof that he had created something special. It was his unique way to stand out in a crowded industry. He never envisioned himself as a World Wrestling Federation superstar. At that time, the World Wrestling Federation was essentially tailored for general audiences. It was highly sanitized. For a brawler like Mick, his gritty style directly clashed with the polished product the promotion was selling. Al Snow, a former superstar and Foley's closest traveling partner, recalls the steep uphill battle. The chairman of the company, Vince McMahon, flatly did not want Mick Foley. McMahon believed Foley was unmarketable and unattractive for television. It took the persistence of Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations, to change the chairman's mind. Ross needed compelling opponents for the top stars, specifically The Undertaker. Vince McMahon kept feeding giant, lumbering athletes to The Undertaker, resulting in dull, uninspiring matches. Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was a lunatic. According to backstage lore, McMahon finally slammed his hand on a table in frustration. Agreeing to bring Foley in under one strict condition, they had to cover his face. McMahon wanted his identity hidden, believing Foley was a nobody. As Hall of Famer Gerald Briscoe noted, the creative team was tasked with building a captivating character out of thin air. Thus, Mankind was born, a tortured, masked soul who dwelled in boiler rooms and pulled his own hair out in fits of rage. This bizarre concept would have failed spectacularly with any other athlete. But Foley's total commitment breathed life into it. Foley understood that without a genuine emotional connection to the audience, the character would mean nothing. He was willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. Chapter 3: Blueprint for a Massacre. The Undertaker and Mankind laid a tremendous foundation. They wrestled in 7 pay-per-view main events and 10 television matches, touring the globe together. However, by 1998, the Mankind character had plateaued. Foley knew he needed to execute something drastic to revitalize his career, something that would cement their legacy rather than detract from it. For the King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using a recently developed concept, Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, steel cage matches in the World Wrestling Federation ended when a competitor escaped over the top or through a door. Foley had previously asked McMahon to revolutionize the concept by placing a solid roof on the cage. 2 men enter, only one leaves. The very first Hell in a Cell match had taken place between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. It was an absolute masterpiece, an athletic milestone that many still consider the greatest iteration of the match. Foley watched that bout with his jaw on the floor, realizing he lacked the traditional athletic agility to replicate what Michaels had done. Searching for inspiration, Foley consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. When asked what they should do to top the previous match, Funk laughed and offered a morbid joke. What if you actually started the match on top of the cell? And what if you were thrown off? Funk stopped laughing when Foley looked back at him in dead seriousness and replied that he thought he could survive that. Foley became obsessed with the idea. He pitched the concept of being thrown off the roof to McMahon and The Undertaker during a casual conversation. Initially, The Undertaker was completely against the idea of throwing his opponent off a steel structure. But Foley was dead set on the stunt. Eventually, he managed to convince both men. At this point in his life, Foley was not viewing this match as the second act of his career. He was merely trying to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed that after this specific run, his career would be over. The Undertaker trusted Foley's vision, operating under the assumption that if Foley could visualize it, he could safely execute it. As they approached June 28th, the pressure was immense. As Foley walked down the aisle, The weight of expectations bore down on him. He knew he had to outdo Shawn Michaels. And as referee Jimmy Quarters noted, Foley was not exactly the most nimble athlete in the locker room. Backstage, Gerald Briscoe sat at the production monitors, acting as the pilot for the broadcast. No one in the arena, from the fans to the commentators, knew what to anticipate. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were entirely in the dark. Foley wanted to start the match in a way no one had ever witnessed. As the bell was about to ring, Mankind climbed the outside wall of the structure. The crowd buzzed with shock. Why was he going up? Was he daring The Undertaker to meet him on the roof? Foley later admitted that while he assured McMahon he was comfortable on top of the cell, he was secretly terrified of heights. As The Undertaker's ominous music echoed through the arena, Foley stood nearly 20 feet in the air, desperately wondering how he could climb back down gracefully without ruining his career. But the die was cast. The Undertaker climbed up to meet him. The match officially began on the roof. Chapter 4. Gravity Takes Hold. Starting a heavyweight fight on a chain-link fence suspended 2 stories in the air created an immediate, suffocating sense of dread. The top section of the cage was held together merely by plastic zip ties. When 600 pounds of human mass began walking across it, the mesh sagged dangerously, dropping by a full foot with every step. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the microphones. The combatants were literally destroying the structure just by standing on it. Foley attempted a wrestling maneuver, hoping to slam The Undertaker onto the mesh. The Undertaker quickly blocked it, realizing that the structural integrity was failing and both men were in imminent danger of falling through completely by accident. They began trading heavy punches, slowly maneuvering toward the edge of the cage. Directly below them sat the Spanish announce table. From Foley's vantage point, the table looked as small as a dollhouse. It was a terrifyingly small target. As they edged closer to the abyss, Jim Ross realized something catastrophic was about to happen. Suddenly, The Undertaker grabbed Mankind, lifted him by his clothing, and hurled a 300-pound human being off the roof. Foley plummeted nearly 20 feet through the air. Time seemed to warp. Witnesses described the fall as simultaneously happening in slow motion and passing in the blink of an eye. With a sickening, deafening crash, Foley shattered the broadcast table. The reaction was pure, unadulterated shock. Backstage, the locker room exploded in panic. It looked like a horrific automobile accident. According to many peers watching the monitors, they genuinely believed Mick Foley was dead. In a business renowned for exaggerated theatrics, no one had ever attempted a stunt of this magnitude. In the arena, a chilling silence was followed by an audible gasp. Colette Foley, watching from home with her 2 young children, frantically repeated that it was all fake, desperately trying to soothe her kids while her own mind raced with terror. But it was believable. It was too believable. The margin for error was microscopic. If The Undertaker had thrown him a fraction too far or a fraction too short, Foley would have violently struck the concrete floor or crushed innocent spectators in the front row. Miraculously, Foley had visualized the fall perfectly. In mid-air, he shifted his body weight to land flat on his back, allowing the desk to absorb and cushion the catastrophic impact. As the medical team rushed to the wreckage, Spanish commentator Hugo Savinovic, who had narrowly dodged the falling athlete, watched in horror. Terry Funk was the first veteran to reach the rubble, urgently checking if his friend was conscious. Dr. François Petit, a highly trained physician and martial artist who served as the company doctor, heard the frantic calls on his radio and sprinted to the arena floor. Foley had landed disastrously on his back, dislocating his shoulder in the process. Emergency medical technicians rushed a stretcher to the ringside area, struggling to navigate the chaotic environment. They strapped Foley to the board. The match was seemingly over. The fans watched in respectful silence, believing they had just witnessed a tragedy. But as the gurney began to move up the aisle, a terrifying realization washed over Foley. He realized that the longer the delay lasted, the more deeply the audience was emotionally invested. Against all medical logic and the pleading of the officials, Foley rolled off the stretcher. The crowd erupted. Foley began to walk, then limp, then march back toward the cage. Officials screamed at him to stop. They begged him to stay down. Backstage, peers watched in disbelief, thinking he was the absolute craziest athlete in the history of the sport. Foley himself later admitted he had no idea how he was going to continue and survive. But he had made a pledge to deliver a masterpiece, and he was completely consumed by adrenaline. He climbed the cage a second time. Chapter 5: The Unplanned Catastrophe. While the first fall was a meticulously calculated risk, the next sequence was a descent into pure chaos. The original plan for the second phase of the match was relatively straightforward. Foley and The Undertaker had agreed to a chokeslam on top of the cage. They anticipated that the heavy impact would cause a specific panel of the chain link mesh to gradually tear, creating a dramatic visual of The Undertaker stuffing mankind through the compromised roof. That is not what happened. When The Undertaker hoisted Foley into the air and drove him down into the steel, the zip ties failed instantaneously. The panel completely gave way without warning. Foley plummeted straight through the roof, falling violently toward the ring mat below. This was not a cushioned announce table. This was a professional wrestling ring, which is essentially tightly pulled canvas over wooden planks and steel beams. Hitting it from that height is akin to falling on a solid cement. To make matters worse, as Foley fell, a heavy steel folding chair that had been resting on top of the cage was dislodged. It followed him down through the air, striking him brutally in the face just as he collided with the mat. The entire arena froze. Backstage, Colette Foley felt her blood run cold. She later stated it was one of the worst moments of her life, furious that her husband had seemingly betrayed her trust by executing another death-defying stunt. But this stunt was a tragic accident. When Foley hit the canvas, he was legitimately knocked out cold. It was the very first time in his legendary career that he had been completely rendered unconscious. Panic flooded the cage. Dr. Petit, Terry Funk, and Vince McMahon rushed the ring. The Undertaker stood above the massive hole in the roof, staring down in absolute horror. He instructed Terry Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. For 42 agonizing seconds, Foley had no memory of what transpired. Funk, realizing the broadcast was still live and they desperately needed to buy medical time, completely improvised. He picked a fight with The Undertaker, forcing the giant to choke-slam him out of his shoes, just to draw the television cameras away from Foley's lifeless body. If there was ever a match that demanded to be stopped by the authorities, it was this one. But according to the unwritten rules of that era, matches were rarely halted. Performers simply bought time. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes scattered across the mat. A massive, gruesome wound had been ripped open underneath his lower lip. In a testament to his bizarre dedication to the craft, Foley's first cognitive thought upon waking was how to create a compelling television image. He consciously thrust his tongue through the open hole in his face and smiled at the camera. Then came the realization of the steel chair's impact. The heavy blow had knocked a tooth completely out of his jaw. Viewers at home noticed something lodged in Foley's nose. According to medical personnel, the tooth had initially been knocked down his throat. However, because Foley was gasping for air so violently, the sheer force of his breathing blew the tooth back up his airway, lodging it in his nasal cavity. The pain was unimaginable. The drama was profoundly real. Foley's eyes were entirely vacant. No one was home. Yet he insisted on finishing the story. He demanded that officials slide thousands of sharp steel thumbtacks into the ring. As the match reached its agonizing conclusion, Foley willingly threw his own broken body onto the bed of thumbtacks, rolling around to ensure they pierced his flesh, absorbing maximum punishment to satisfy the narrative. Finally, after 17 excruciating minutes, The Undertaker delivered the final blow and secured the victory. Chapter 6: The price of immortality. As the bell rang, the Pittsburgh crowd of 16,000 stood in absolute awe. The medical team brought the stretcher back to the ring, but Foley proudly waved it off, sparking an eruption of respect from the audience. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of immense relief and profound concern. Vince McMahon was one of the first people to greet Foley behind the curtain. The chairman shook his hand, thanked him for everything he had sacrificed for the company, and sternly begged him to never do anything like that again. Meanwhile, Foley, still suffering from severe head trauma, turned to The Undertaker and asked if they had remembered to use the thumbtacks, completely unaware that the medical staff was actively plucking dozens of metal tacks from his bleeding skin at that exact moment. The physical toll was devastating. According to medical reports, Foley required 15 stitches just to close the wound under his lip. He permanently lost 2 teeth. He suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, and a severely bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks. At the time, the medical staff did not even properly evaluate him for a major concussion. Colette Foley waited in agonizing silence for hours until Mick finally called home. When she answered, she was hysterical, screaming that their children genuinely believed he had died on live television. From that night onward, her trust in his safety was permanently fractured. Yet, from a professional standpoint, the match was a monumental triumph. It completely revitalized Foley's career. 6 months after Vince McMahon deemed him unmarketable, Mick Foley was crowned the World Wrestling Federation champion. The fans connected with his relentless willpower. But success breeds a dangerous addiction. The bar had been raised, and Foley felt immense pressure to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed his physical limits even further in a brutal "I Quit" match against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Ignoring the explicit warnings of management and his wife, Foley orchestrated a sequence where he was handcuffed and rendered defenseless. The original script called for him to take 5 unprotected steel chair shots to the head. In the heat of the moment, the violence escalated out of control. Foley absorbed 11 unprotected, full-force chair blows to the skull. His children watched in horror from the front row. It was a sickening display. As critics and medical experts later noted, 11 unprotected headshots could easily kill a normal human being. Foley willingly accepted severe brain trauma for the sake of a television storyline. Eventually, the medical community had to intervene. A prominent neurologist independently evaluated Foley and delivered a sobering verdict. If he continued to wrestle, he would end up permanently crippled. Today, the wrestling industry possesses a much deeper understanding of head injuries. We now know the devastating realities of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease caused by repetitive trauma. Taking a standard fall in a wrestling ring is scientifically compared to experiencing a 25-mile-per-hour car crash. Foley endured thousands of these crashes, compounded by falls from cages, concrete impacts, and unprotected weapon strikes. Foley openly admits he suffers from severe neurological issues. He experiences memory loss. He struggles to remember routes to his own home. He pays a heavy, daily physical price for his fame. To combat the cognitive decline, he now performs spoken word tours, utilizing the stage as mental gymnastics to keep his brain sharp and retain the crowd connection he so deeply craves. Epilogue. Was it worth it? For years, Mick Foley harbored deep resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match. He fell into a dark psychological place, frustrated that despite a career filled with championships, charity work, and best-selling books, the general public only remembered him as the man who was thrown off a cage. He felt as though his other accomplishments had been entirely eclipsed by 17 minutes of sheer violence. However, a poignant conversation with The Undertaker altered his perspective. The Undertaker reminded him that what they created that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. It is immortal. Foley eventually embraced the legacy. He realizes that the core reason he entered the grueling world of professional wrestling was to create moments of pure, unfiltered awe. Very few people on the planet possess the ability to leave an arena of 16,000 people in absolute, breathless shock. Mick Foley is one of those rare entities. Years later, while touring a World Wrestling Entertainment storage facility with his daughter Noelle, Foley unexpectedly came face to face with the original Hell in a Cell structure. As he reached out and touched the rusted steel, the legendary brawler broke down and wept. It was a profound realization of his own mortality. He understood how incredibly fortunate he was to simply be alive. Looking back, medical experts assert that no financial reward or championship belt is worth the catastrophic risk he took. Foley himself concedes that we know much more about brain trauma today, yet he cannot state with absolute certainty that he would have changed his actions on that fateful night. According to Foley, the world offered him a canvas to create surreal, sublime performance art. It was a violent, painful, and terrifying path. But on certain nights, when the crowd roared and the emotional connection was pure, it was the most powerful feeling in the world. The Hell in a Cell match remains a chilling monument in the annals of sports history. It is a testament to human endurance, the dangerous allure of fame, and the absolute limits a man will push himself to in order to ensure he is never, ever forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the archives. Until next time, respect the ring, and never forget the sacrifices made for the roar of the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, step into the shadows of professional wrestling history. We are looking back at a night that forever altered the landscape of sports entertainment. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view, a match took place that would cement its legacy as one of the most shocking, terrifying, and awe-inspiring spectacles ever broadcast. The Undertaker versus Mankind. The structure was Hell in a Cell. To understand the magnitude of what happened that night, we have to understand the man behind the mask of Mankind. Who is Mick Foley? According to the accounts of those closest to him, everyone who enters the wrestling business is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Foley, his childhood was marked by being teased. He harbored an overwhelming, deep-seated need to be liked. This was a young man who, during his sophomore year in college, drank red food coloring and threw himself off a bed onto a concrete floor, just to spit up the fake blood and elicit a reaction from his dorm mates. A girl in the room called it the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, and in that moment, Foley felt power. The psychology was set. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He needed reactions. He needed to be noticed. But behind the madness, as his wife Colette Foley, who has known him for over 35 years, recalls, there was a gentle soul. She fell in love with his eyes, his corny jokes, and his terrible sense of humor. Their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast. Yet, Colette understood his commitment to the business. When the adrenaline was pumping, he wanted people to leave the arena talking about how great the show was, entirely at his own physical risk. His early career was built on pushing the absolute limits of physical endurance. He developed the persona of Cactus Jack, a wild and unpredictable figure who utilized realism to connect with the audience. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, noted that Foley was a master of ring psychology. He understood that fans craved someone who appeared completely out of control, someone who seemed to go against the script. By taking the audience on that dangerous ride, the attention shifted entirely to him, and his reputation swelled. To build that reputation, Foley spent hours studying his craft. His bedroom furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a black and white television with a videocassette recorder that barely worked. He would sit and watch up to 12 hours of Japanese professional wrestling a day. He was captivated by the realism and the storytelling, where a competitor did not just defeat their opponent, but also had to survive their brutal surroundings. He eventually traveled to Japan, stepping into explosive, fiery death matches alongside the legendary Terry Funk, who became a mentor to him. Funk was an absolute master at making an audience suspend their disbelief, and Foley was a willing student. Foley crawled on his hands and knees through broken glass and barbed wire, believing this was his path to standing out. However, the World Wrestling Federation during that era was not an extreme environment. It was heavily regulated, geared toward general audiences, and incredibly bland compared to the violent tapes Foley studied. Vince McMahon, the chairman, initially had zero interest in bringing Mick Foley into the company. He did not think Foley was marketable or attractive. It took Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince McMahon to take a chance on him. Ross needed a fresh, unpredictable opponent for one of the biggest stars in the history of the business, The Undertaker. McMahon finally relented, slamming his hand on a table and agreeing to hire Foley. But on one condition, his face had to be covered. McMahon viewed Foley as a nobody, leading to the creation of the character Mankind. According to Gerald Briscoe, a producer and Hall of Famer, creating a character out of nothing was a monumental task. But it worked because of Mick Foley's total commitment. Fans can sense authenticity. Foley threw himself into the role with reckless abandon. Ross had the unenviable task of trying to keep Foley from destroying himself, as Foley was willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. This brings us to the summer of 1998. Foley and The Undertaker had built a solid foundation through 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches, traveling the globe together. But Foley felt his character had plateaued. He needed to do something extraordinary to cement their legacy. The producers planned to reignite the feud using a relatively new concept, Hell in a Cell. The first iteration of this match, featuring Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, was a masterpiece of storytelling. Foley looked at that previous match and realized he could not replicate the athletic feats those two men performed. Seeking advice, Foley asked his mentor, Terry Funk, what they should do. Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the cage and that Foley should be thrown off. It was meant as a laugh, but Foley stopped, looked at Funk, and said he thought he could do it. The seed was planted. Foley pitched the idea to The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon, casually assuring them he had been on top of the cell before and that it was completely safe. The Undertaker was hesitant, but Foley was resolute. Foley later admitted he did not view this match as the second act of his career. He simply thought this was his grand finale. He believed when this run was over, his career would be too. The atmosphere at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena was electric. 16,000 fans packed the building. Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, watched from the production monitors alongside Gerald Briscoe. Nobody knew what was about to unfold. When Mankind's music hit, instead of entering the structure, he began to climb it. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, calling the action at ringside, were completely in the dark. Foley had lied about his comfort with heights. As he scaled the imposing steel structure, he was terrified. He wondered how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his career. Then The Undertaker followed him up. When the two massive men stood on the roof, the tension was palpable. The top section of the cage was secured with simple zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight shifting above, the mesh began to buckle. Each step caused the steel to sag by a foot. The zip ties began popping, echoing through the arena. Foley attempted a maneuver, but The Undertaker cut him off. Knowing the roof was dangerously close to giving way entirely, they moved toward the edge. Below them sat the Spanish announce table, looking no larger than a dollhouse from a height of nearly 20 feet. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. And then it happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and hurled him off the top of the cell. For those watching, time seemed to slow down, yet it was over in the blink of an eye. A 300-pound man crashed violently through the announce table. The impact was sickening. Backstage, the locker room erupted in horror. It was described as being akin to witnessing a fatal car crash. Jim Ross screamed on the broadcast, wondering if they had just witnessed a tragedy. The silence of the crowd was punctuated by audible gasps. Colette Foley, watching at home with their 2 young children, frantically tried to assure them it was all fake, while secretly panicking herself. The realism of the moment transcended sports entertainment. Terry Funk was the first to reach Foley's side, asking if he was conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, the company physician, rushed from the medical room. Emergency medical technicians arrived with a gurney, but it would not fit through the aisle, forcing the production crew to physically raise the massive steel cell while the Undertaker remained standing on top of it. They strapped Foley to the gurney. The match appeared to be over. But as he was being wheeled up the ramp, Foley realized something. The longer he stayed on television, the more the audience was emotionally invested. Pushing through the adrenaline and the trauma, Foley rolled off the gurney. Officials pleaded with him to stop, but he began climbing the cell once again. Backstage personnel could not believe what they were seeing. The next planned sequence was supposed to be a choke slam on top of the cell, slowly breaking the mesh so Foley could be stuffed through it. But the battered steel gave way prematurely. The Undertaker choke-slammed Mankind, and the roof completely collapsed. Foley plummeted through the air, crashing onto the unforgiving ring mat below, which is essentially a layer of canvas stretched over wood and steel beams. Worse still, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the opening right behind him, striking him directly in the face upon impact. This was not planned. This was raw, unscripted collateral damage. Backstage, Colette Foley was screaming at her television screen, furiously trying to call the company, unable to get through to anyone. For the first time in his career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. The ring filled with officials. Dr. Petit and Terry Funk surrounded the motionless body. The Undertaker looked down from the torn roof, instructing Funk to see if Foley was even breathing. Funk reported back that he was alive. There was a stretch of 42 seconds that Foley completely lost to the void. To buy time for the medical staff, Funk engaged in an improvised physical altercation with The Undertaker. According to many industry veterans, this was a match that absolutely should have been stopped. But in that era, matches were rarely halted. Performers simply bought time. Incredibly, Foley regained consciousness. Seeing Terry Funk's shoes, he realized he was still in the match and forced himself to his feet. He was a battered shell of a man. His jaw was dislocated, his shoulder popped out of its socket, and he had a massive wound beneath his lip. Ever the showman, even through the haze of a severe concussion, Foley pushed his tongue through the hole in his lip to create a gruesome visual for the cameras. A tooth, knocked out by the falling chair, had somehow become lodged in his nasal passage. Yet, the match continued. Foley introduced hundreds of metal thumbtacks into the ring, willingly taking further punishment, ensuring his body absorbed the maximum amount of damage. When the 17-minute ordeal finally ended with The Undertaker claiming victory, Foley refused a stretcher and walked out under his own power. The crowd roared in utter disbelief. He had given them everything. The aftermath was sobering. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached Foley, thanked him for his sacrifice, but demanded he never do anything like that again. Foley required 15 stitches just beneath his lip. He suffered a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, a dislocated jaw, a separated shoulder, and severe head trauma. But the match fundamentally changed how the audience and the industry viewed him. 6 months later, he became the world champion. However, the bar had been raised to an impossible height. Foley felt a profound pressure to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, he pushed those limits again in an infamous I Quit match against The Rock. The original plan called for Foley to take a few unprotected chair shots to the head while handcuffed. Instead, he absorbed 11 consecutive brutal strikes. The match was so violently excessive that his family, seated in the front row, was left traumatized. His daughter, Noelle, admits she has no distinct memories of her father wrestling, likely due to the psychological distress of watching him endure such savage beatings. The long-term cost of this style of performance is staggering. Foley ignored the warnings of medical professionals who told him his career would leave him crippled. He suffered concussion upon concussion. An independent neurologist explicitly warned him never to wrestle again, citing severe brain trauma. Today, the shadow of chronic traumatic encephalopathy looms over his legacy. CTE is a terrifying reality for athletes who endure repetitive head trauma, leading to memory loss and cognitive decline. His family lives in daily fear of what his health will look like in 10 or 20 years. Was it worth it? That is the question that haunts the legacy of Hell in a Cell. Foley sacrificed his physical well-being for the roar of the crowd, trading his future health for the acceptance of strangers. For years, he harbored resentment that his entire legendary career was reduced to a single, chaotic match. He found himself in a dark place, feeling as though he had accomplished nothing else of value. But over time, Foley found peace. During a conversation with The Undertaker, his legendary opponent told him that what they created that night would outlive them both. Foley eventually embraced that truth. He stepped into the ring to create unforgettable moments. And on that night in 1998, he created a masterpiece of danger and drama. When Foley and his daughter recently visited the company archives and saw the original cell structure, the memories rushed back. He touched the rusted steel and began to weep. It was a profound realization of how close he came to losing everything, and how fortunate he is to still be alive to tell the tale. Professional wrestling is a canvas for surreal, sublime performance art. Mick Foley pushed the absolute boundaries of what the human body could endure. The documents and accounts show us a man who danced on the edge of catastrophe for our entertainment. It was a terrifying, magical, and deeply controversial journey. And while the toll on his body is undeniable, his legacy as the ultimate survivor of the squared circle remains undisputed. Welcome to a journey into the shadows of the squared circle. I have spent my entire career sitting at ringside, calling the action, analyzing the psychology, and witnessing the evolution of professional wrestling across the World Wrestling Federation. World Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling, Total Nonstop Action, and all Elite Wrestling. I have seen the triumphs, and I have documented the tragedies. But if you ask me to point to the single most defining, terrifying, and awe-inspiring night in the history of this industry, my mind always travels back to a single date. June 28, 1998, the King of the Ring pay-per-view. The match was The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. Going into that night, the industry knew the concept was going to be crazy, but nobody knew it was going to be that crazy. You had two talents out there that liked to push the envelope until it fell over the edge. People often say wrestling is fake, but let me tell you, you cannot fake gravity. I have been frightened by a lot of things in professional wrestling throughout the decades, but nothing frightened me as much as that match did, at least until the later stages of that very same bout. What left the fans stunned, what left the entire world completely speechless, was the unrelenting punishment that Mick Foley endured. Until you saw it with your own two eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically take that level of abuse and live to talk about it. This match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. People backstage were screaming, cursing, calling him an absolute idiot for doing what he was doing. Why are you doing this? That was the question echoing through the arena. Today, it stands as one of the most infamous matches in wrestling history, a legacy that persists as both an epic success and a grim cautionary tale. According to those who were there, the industry dodged several bullets that day. It is truly staggering to think that an organization would allow a performer to go completely unconscious and then simply continue the match. The collateral damage that ensued is an entirely different story, one that begs the ultimate question: when does it stop? When is it enough? You pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but everyone who watches it needs to ask themselves, was it worth it? To understand the match, we have to understand the man behind the mask. Everyone who gets into professional wrestling is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the driving force was a profound need for acceptance. According to his own recollections, he was teased heavily in his youth, which created an overwhelming need to be liked, and an overwhelming drive to capture the World Wrestling Federation Championship. He once told a story about his time as a college sophomore. He took a swig of red food coloring and performed a massive leap off a bed onto a stuffed atom, resting on a concrete floor. When he hit the floor, he spat the fake blood concoction out. The entire dorm was watching. When one of the female students yelled that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt a rush of power. He realized that if he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He just needed to get reactions. He needed to be noticed. He would eventually become known globally as the hardcore legend, the man who survived hell in a cell. Today, many fans point to that specific match as their perfect gateway into professional wrestling. It is often the first match new fans are shown, hooking them instantly. But the follow-up question is always whether they expect every match to be like that, because they absolutely are not. A normal Mick Foley match was already remarkably brutal. His repertoire included thumbtacks, barbed wire, and fire. According to historical footage, he was involved in death matches in Japan where he was exploded by explosives, speared through flaming tables, and took brutal falls directly onto concrete floors. He put his body through unimaginable physical trauma. According to his daughter, Noelle Foley, he simply loved getting a massive reaction from the crowd, chasing that audible shock and awe. Realism was his greatest tool. Foley himself admitted that he did not feel he had a good match unless he had trouble walking back to his hotel room. He did not enjoy the physical pain, but he deeply enjoyed his ability to absorb it and sell it in a way that entertained the masses. Colette Foley, his wife of over 35 years, noted that beneath the brutality was a gentle, nice person with a terrible sense of humor. They were a team, and she understood his commitment to the business. She knew that when his adrenaline was pumping, his only desire was for the audience to leave talking about how great the show was, completely at his own risk. That relentless drive pushed him to get crazier along the way. Before the World Wrestling Federation, he developed a personality called Cactus Jack. He was a wild, unpredictable character who made you question his sanity. But he possessed undeniable charisma. You could not take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, recognized Foley as a master of in-ring psychology. Foley knew the fans were drawn to characters who appeared out of control, characters who went off the script. He could take the audience on a psychological ride and extract the exact emotional response he desired. By forcing the attention onto himself, his reputation grew. During those early years, his dedication to the craft bordered on obsession. His bedroom furniture consisted merely of a mattress on the floor and a black and white television, connected to a videocassette recorder that barely worked. He would watch up to 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes a day, studying the realism and the storytelling. He realized that a great match was not just man versus man. It was a battle against the environment itself. At one point, Foley believed his future lay permanently in Japan. The Japanese promoters were looking for a foreign talent to feud with the legendary Terry Funk, a man celebrated for his unparalleled ability to make an audience suspend their disbelief. Funk became a mentor to Foley, and together they orchestrated incredibly violent, explosive, and fiery death matches across Japan. Foley was naturally drawn to the extreme, often leaving the ring on his hands and knees, viewing his suffering as undeniable proof that he had created something special. He used this extreme style to stand out, assuming he would never fit the mold of a World Wrestling Federation superstar. At that time, the World Wrestling Federation was operating in a very family-friendly, general audiencia. It was a restrictive environment, and Foley's brutal style simply did not align with the product. According to Al Snow, a former superstar and Foley's travel partner, Vince McMahon initially had zero interest in hiring Mick Foley. McMahon felt Foley was unmarketable and unattractive for television. It took the persistence of Jim Ross, who was the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince McMahon to take a chance. Ross argued that the company desperately needed compelling dancing partners for their top stars, particularly The Undertaker, who was arguably the biggest star in the history of the business. McMahon had been feeding The Undertaker a series of giant, lumbering opponents, which resulted in dull and boring television. Ross insisted they needed a lunatic. According to industry lore, McMahon finally slammed his hand on a table and agreed to bring Foley in, but under one strict condition. They were going to cover his face. McMahon insisted the audience should know nothing about his true identity, reflecting his initial perception that Foley was a nobody. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Famer and backstage producer, recalled the challenge of building a character out of absolutely nothing. The result was Mankind, a disturbed, masked entity residing in boiler rooms. This bizarre concept would have failed miserably in the hands of anyone else, but Foley made it work. He understood that without a genuine connection to the audience, a character is meaningless. He poured his absolute soul into Mankind, and the fans sensed his total commitment. Ross's goal was fulfilled. Foley became the perfect opponent for The Undertaker. Foley was willing to try anything. The legendary quote from backstage was that he did not turn anything down except the bed covers. The new challenge for the creative team was simply trying to keep him from killing himself in the ring. The Undertaker and Foley built an incredible foundation together, wrestling in 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches across the globe. However, Foley felt his character had hit a plateau. He knew he needed to do something drastic to elevate their legacy rather than detract from it. For the 1998 King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using a recently developed concept, the Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, steel cage matches required a competitor to escape over the top or through the door. The new concept added a roof to the cage, ensuring both men were locked inside with no escape. The first Hell in a Cell match had taken place between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, setting an unbelievably high standard. Foley openly admitted he could not replicate the athletic feats of Michaels and The Undertaker. 9 months later, it was Foley's turn to step inside the structure. Seeking advice, Foley turned to his mentor, Terry Funk. During their conversation, Funk jokingly suggested that they should start the match on top of the cell, and then Foley should be thrown off. While Funk was laughing, Foley stopped him and deadpanned that he could actually do that. Foley could not get the idea out of his head. He casually pitched the idea of being thrown off the roof to Vince McMahon and The Undertaker. According to those involved, The Undertaker was incredibly hesitant to throw Foley off the structure, but Foley was absolutely dead set on the idea. Eventually, he managed to convince them. Foley later revealed that he did not view this match as the second act of his career. Rather, he saw it as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed his career was nearing its end. He told The Undertaker his plan high spots, assuring everyone he would be fine. The Undertaker trusted Foley's vision, believing that if Foley could see it in his mind, he could execute it safely. When the night of June 28, 1998 arrived, 16,000 fans packed the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, completely unaware of the spectacle they were about to witness. The pressure on Foley was immense. He had to follow the legendary Michaels match, despite knowing he was not the most nimble athlete. Backstage, Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, was watching the monitors closely alongside Gerald Briscoe, who was orchestrating the production from the captain's seat. At the broadcast desk, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were completely in the dark, experiencing the match with the same surprise as the fans at home. Foley wanted to start the match in a way no one had ever seen before. As his music hit, instead of walking into the cage, he began climbing to the roof. The audience and the commentators were in absolute shock. The Undertaker's music played, and as Foley waited on the roof, he silently worried about how he would gracefully climb back down without ruining his career. He had assured management that he was comfortable on top of the cell, but the reality was that he was terrified of heights. When The Undertaker climbed up to meet him, the match officially began on the roof. It immediately created a psychological fear among everyone watching, an overwhelming sense of impending doom. The structural integrity of the cell was immediately tested. The top panels of the chain link mesh were secured with zip ties. With over 600 pounds of human weight moving across it, the mesh began to sag by about a foot with every step. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted to execute a suplex on the roof, but The Undertaker instinctively blocked it, realizing the very real danger that they could both fall straight through the unstable mesh. The brawl moved toward the edge of the cage, directly above the broadcast tables. Backstage, officials believed it was impossible for Foley to actually take a tumble from that height, assuming the margin for error was simply too small. Looking down, Foley saw the broadcast table looking as small as a dollhouse. Then the unthinkable happened. From almost 20 feet in the air, a 300-pound man was flung off the edge of the steel structure. According to Foley, the fall felt like it happened in slow motion, yet also in the blink of an eye. The impact was catastrophic. Foley crashed through the announcer table with a sickening thud. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely managed to dive out of the way before the impact. Backstage, the locker room erupted in sheer panic. It looked exactly like a fatal car accident. Jim Ross famously yelled on the broadcast, wondering if they had just witnessed a man die. The sheer audacity of the stunt blew everyone's mind. Nobody in the history of the business had ever attempted something so recklessly dangerous. The silence that followed was deafening. The audience gasped. Colette Foley, watching at home with their 2 young children, frantically tried to soothe them by repeating that it was fake, even as her own mind spiraled into panic. She knew the pain was real. If The Undertaker had thrown him just a fraction of an inch too far or too short, Foley would have landed directly on the concrete floor, or worse, into the audience. Foley later credited his survival to visualizing the fall in his mind, allowing him to turn his body in mid-air to land perfectly flat on the desk, using it to cushion the blow. As medical personnel, including the highly skilled team physician Dr. Francois Petit, rushed to ringside, the gravity of the situation settled in. Dr. Petit, a martial arts expert known for his ability to fix severe physical maladies, arrived to find Foley in terrible condition. Foley had landed terribly on his back and had severely dislocated his shoulder. The emergency medical technicians brought a gurney to ringside, a process complicated by the massive steel cell. They strapped Foley to the board, and everyone from the fans to the executives backstage believed the match was absolutely over. But as the gurney began to move up the aisle, a terrifying realization washed over Foley. He felt that staying in the match would keep the audience fully engaged. With a dislocated shoulder and a battered spine, he rolled off the gurney. Officials, referees, and medical staff pleaded with him to stop, asking him what he was doing and telling him his night was over. Against all medical advice and basic human logic, Foley began to climb the towering steel structure for a second time. The crowd erupted, shifting their absolute support behind a man who simply refused to quit. Backstage, producers knew the script had been thrown out the window, but they let the moment breathe, understanding that this unscripted madness was cementing Foley as a transcendent star. The second major stunt of the match was intended to be much safer. The plan was for The Undertaker to chokeslam Foley onto the mesh, causing it to gradually give way, allowing The Undertaker to stuff him down through the hole for a dramatic visual. However, things went catastrophically wrong. When The Undertaker executed the choke slam, the zip ties completely failed. The panel gave way instantly, and Foley plummeted through the roof of the cell. This time, there was no broadcast table to break his fall. He fell directly from the roof, crashing onto the ring mat. The wrestling ring is heavily reinforced with steel beams and wood, and falling onto it from that height is described by professionals as being identical to hitting solid cement. To make matters worse, a heavy steel folding chair that had been on the roof fell through the hole,